Someone knocked on the coffin from the inside. The first thud sounded like a mistake. A branch, a raccoon, the house settling into its bones. The second thud chose a rhythm, 2 precise beats with a breath between, and the third carried a message anyone could understand. Open up. On the hill above Darlow's ferry, the chapel's bell rope hung cut like a dead serpent. The cemetery lay salted with frost, each headstone wearing a thin white crown. Mara stood halfway down the gravel path with a bouquet of paper lilies in her arms, pretending to visit her mother and very carefully not thinking about the job she had agreed to do at midnight. She heard the fourth knock, softer, more patient, and she knew exactly which coffin it came from. Plot 39B. The unmarked grave, the sexton swore, had been empty yesterday morning and occupied by dusk. 5 men said they'd seen pallbearers where no funeral had been scheduled. 2 said they'd seen the pallbearer's feet hovering a thumb's width above the ground. Mara had seen stranger. That was the trouble. She walked past the angel with the broken face and the cedar stump struck by lightning last spring. The fog rose from the river, a slow tide of breath seeping between the stones. She set the paper lilies on her mother's grave, touched the cold marble, and whispered the same promise she made every time. Not yet, but soon. Plot 39B waited where the slope flattened, a rectangle of freshly turned soil stitched with spade marks. Someone had pressed 3 coins into the dirt at the head. Iron pennies, rusting already. Someone else had drawn a circle of salt around the mound and broken it deliberately at the foot, the way you leave a door unlocked for a guest you're not sure you want. The 5th knock came with a crawly, wooden groan. Mara knelt, pulled off her gloves with her teeth, and dug until her nails burned. The first board yielded quicker than it should have. The coffin lid was old wood, old design, the kind that creaks like a confession. When she lifted it, lantern light poured into a narrow darkness and found a face she recognized at once. The town clockmaker, Abram Vance, who had died 3 weeks ago and whose watch had stopped at 12:03 the night of the winter storm. His eyes were open. He did not breathe. He moved his lips and, very politely, asked for the time. Mara checked the watch she wore on a leather thong around her wrist, the one that used to be his. "Midnight," she said. "Then I'm not late," said Abram Vance, and every clock in town chimed at once. The sound rolled over the hill like iron surf, each peal cuffing the fog and sending rings across the air. Even the chapel bell answered, though its rope dangled in 2 dead tails. Birds burst from the cedars and wheeled away as if the sky itself had been slapped awake. Mara steadied the lantern, her breath stripping white in the cold, and watched Abram Vance sit up with the terrible grace of a marionette whose strings had remembered their work. He blinked, puzzled, polite. Frost limned his lashes like ground glass. "Thank you," he said, though he did not seem to notice the open coffin or the dirt caking the cuffs of his black coat. His hands were clean, too clean, as if the grave had never touched him. "You were buried at noon," Mara said. "Now you're asking at midnight." "At noon the debt was counted," he replied. "At midnight it comes due." The coins at the head of the grave had turned dark as clotted blood. Something in the soil behind them stirred, a slow, wet breathing that the earth tried not to do. The salt circle brightened around the mound like hoarfrost under moonlight, then went out again where it had been broken, a door ajar. Mara knew debts. She carried 3. A mother who waited under stone, a brother who drowned on a blue June day, and a watch that refused to belong to the dead it had outlived. She lifted Abram's old timepiece from her wrist and held it where he could see the spidered crystal. "Stopped at 12:03, she said. "Of course." His smile was thin as a razor. 3 minutes were all I could afford." The wind shifted. The river smell climbed the hill, green and black and cold. From the ferry below came a hollow thud, as if an oar struck something that was not water. The lantern flame thinned, turned blue at the heart, and went on burning only because she told it to. "Who cut the rope?" Mara asked, glancing toward the chapel. "The pallbearers," said Abram, as if naming a weather. "Their hands do not care for ladders." He swung his legs over the coffin wall, stiff but certain. No breath plumed from his mouth. No cloud formed on the lantern glass when he leaned close. "You open the lid, Miss Mara. Will you open the door?" "What door?" "The one on the clock," he said gently. "Before the missing 3 minutes, collect the rest." Across the valley the courthouse tower shivered. and beneath the wind she heard a sound no one else ever noticed. The teeth of a great gear beginning to grind on bone. The tower loomed above the valley, black ribs of iron and brass glinting faintly in the moonlight. For a century, its chime had been the heartbeat of Darlow's ferry. But as Abram Vance spoke, a thin whine wound through the air, as though the gears themselves were grinding against bone. Mara's hand tightened around the lantern. The missing 3 minutes. What happens if they collect? Abram tilted his head, listening to something only he could hear. His eyes glowed faintly, not with fire, but with the cold gleam of watch hands in moonlight. "Every clock in town will stop," he murmured. "And when time halts, what walks between the ticks will no longer need doors." The fog seemed to pulse with the words, thickening in shapes almost human, as if faces pressed against the veil of night. Mara saw pale outlines moving across the slope, drifting closer, their steps never quite touching earth. "The pallbearers," she whispered. Abram's smile was gentle, almost sorrowful. "They are punctual." The salt circle around his grave trembled, glowing faintly before another gap appeared in the line, this one not made by human hand. The soil cracked, splitting in thin, lightning-like fractures, each one ticking open in rhythm with the grinding tower clock. Mara dropped to her knees and clawed the broken salt, trying to reseal it, but the grains scattered like ashes in wind, refusing to bind. The air grew colder. Her breath hung heavier. From the chapel, the cut bell rope swayed on its own, brushing the stone wall with a whispering scrape. Abram placed a hand lightly on her wrist. His fingers were as cold as the marble graves, yet steady. "You cannot bar them out with salt now. The door is already ajar." "Then what do I do?" He looked at his old watch dangling from her wrist. "You open the lid. That makes you the keeper. Win the watch, Mara. Give back the minutes or take them for yourself." Her throat tightened. She felt the faint pulse of the dead time locked inside the gears, 3 stolen beats waiting to belong to someone. If she wound it, something would be set free. If she didn't, something else would arrive to claim the debt. And as the grinding turned to a slow, deliberate tick, tick, tick across the valley, Mara realized the choice had to be made before the 12th stroke. The courthouse bell struck 11, then stalled. Its iron tongue froze mid-swing, shuddering as though caught in a giant's fist. The sound hung in the air like a cracked note that refused to fade, buzzing through the bones of every grave on the hill. Mara gripped the watch so hard its cracked crystal pressed into her skin. The silence between ticks stretched wider and wider, like a rope being pulled past breaking. Shadows moved closer, spilling from the fog. Figures draped in mourning cloth, their faces empty hollows where eyes should be. The pallbearers. They glided without footsteps, for on each side, hands dangling inches above the earth. Yet somehow the coffins they carried, black boxes heavy with nothing, or perhaps with everything, remained steady in the air. Their robes did not stir, but the fog curled around them as if worshipping. Abram bowed his head slightly, in the old way, the way a craftsman greets others of his guild. "They are here for the missing time," he said softly. "If you give it to them, the town will sleep undisturbed. If you refuse—" He glanced toward the dark valley where the ferry creaked against its ropes. "Then Darlow's ferry will know what stirs when the world forgets to turn." Mara's heart pounded, but the rhythm was wrong. Slipping in and out, skipping beats as though the watch inside her chest had been tampered with. She lifted the cracked timepiece, fingers trembling. One of the pallbearers halted before her. It did not speak, but its hollow face leaned close, and she felt the pull of it, like a tide dragging her breath into its nothingness. The watch in her hand buzzed faintly, alive with the stolen minutes. Abram whispered, "Wind it, Mara. Choose." Her thumb brushed the crown of the watch. She imagined turning it, releasing those 3 minutes to the pallbearers. Peace for the town. But then she thought of her mother's grave behind her, and of the promise whispered every visit. Not yet, but soon. 3 minutes was enough to change a fate. Enough to keep a heart beating when it should have stopped. Her throat ached with the weight of it. Her choice was not between peace and doom. It was between surrendering the time to the faceless dead or claiming it for the living. The watch's gears clicked once under her thumb, louder than the courthouse bell. Every shadow leaned closer, waiting, and in that stretched, trembling silence, Mara knew the pallbearers would not wait much longer. Mara twisted the watch key, and the sound it made was wrong. Not a soft wind of gears, but a crack like ice splitting on a frozen lake. The pallbearers stopped mid-glide, heads turning as one toward the tiny silver circle in her hand. The gears inside screamed against each other, coughing sparks of light that looked like slivers of dawn breaking through midnight. The fog recoiled. The coffins they carried quivered in the air. For a moment, all 8 shadows leaned back, as if shielding themselves from something they had not expected. Abram Vance's dead eyes widened. "You're not giving it back." "No," Mara whispered, her voice fierce despite the tremor in her bones. "I'm keeping it." The second twist flared brighter. Heat bled from the watch, though the air around her froze so sharply that frost bloomed across her lantern glass. The flame inside guttered but did not die. And then the first minute arrived. It came like a breath, her mother's breath. For a heartbeat, Mara swore she heard it. The familiar rasp of the woman who had raised her, who had left too soon, waiting silent beneath the stone just a few graves away. The sound seared her chest. Tears stung her eyes, but she did not stop. The pallbearers moved again, faster now, cloth whipping in a wind that wasn't there. Their coffins clapped shut of their own accord, a thunder that shook the hillside. "Mara!" Abram's voice broke, sharp with something that might have been fear. 3 minutes is not a gift. It is a chain. If you bind it to yourself, you cannot lay it down. The third twist locked the crown with a click that echoed like a closing door. And with it, the final minute poured into her veins, a molten flood. Every beat of her heart became louder, brighter, steadier, until she thought her ribs would burst from the pressure. The pallbearers shrieked, not with mouths, for they had none, but with the wind itself. The chapel bell rope swung madly, though no clapper struck. Across the valley, the courthouse clock stuttered once, coughed, and then began to run again, its ticks falling like hammers. But the cost revealed itself instantly. Mara's shadow on the frost no longer moved when she did. It lagged a fraction behind, like another person tethered to her feet. And in its face, dark though it was, 2 pale eyes opened and blinked. The eyes in the frost-dark shape blinked again, slow and patient. When Mara lifted her hand, the shadow hand rose a beat too late, its fingers twitching with hunger rather than mimicry. Every movement was no longer an echo but a duel, a contest of who led and who followed. The pallbearers recoiled from her, their hollow faces turned not to Mara but to what clung at her feet. One by one, they lowered their coffins, setting them gently on the frozen earth. No sound, no weight, just boxes that breathed like lungs. Abram Vance stared at her shadow, his mouth parting in awe. "You've made a keeper." "I didn't." Mara's throat locked, the words strangled by the weight of the watch hammering against her pulse. "I only wound it. That is all it takes." His eyes burned with a feverish gleam. "You have claimed the minutes, and the minutes claimed you. It will follow, it will grow, it will demand more than 3. And when the hours arrive..." He cut himself off, as if the words themselves might summon them. The pallbearers shrieked again, a dry, windless cry, and in unison they lifted their empty faces to the tower clock. Its hands jerked forward, catching up on the beats it had lost. Each tick was a lash across the night. Mara stumbled backward, dragging her lantern, dragging the impossible shadow that wanted to lead. The eyes in the frost-dark face never blinked away. When she stopped, it stopped. When she breathed, it inhaled later, deeper, hungrier. Abram stood, coffin at his back, and for the first time his polite mask cracked. Fear edged his voice. "You must decide quickly. Either dismiss it before the hour completes, or allow it to be born." The word born made Mara's skin crawl. Her shadow quivered at her feet like a living thing, the eyes widening, lips forming shapes her own mouth had not. And in the distance, from the river's black belly, the ferry rope snapped. The sound thundered through the valley, final as judgment. The pallbearers turned toward the water. Whatever waited there, they had come to serve. Her lantern dimmed, her shadow's mouth opened, and in a voice that was her own, but deeper, older, it whispered, "Give me the rest of the night." The words slid from its mouth like smoke, curling into Mara's ears, into the cracks of her chest where grief had lived for years. "Give me the rest of the night." The sound was her voice, but older, wiser, dripping with promises. She staggered back, but the shadow clung, its eyes glowing faintly in the frost. The pallbearers bent low, their faceless hoods turned toward the river. Something vast shifted beneath the black water. The ferry, now unmoored, drifted slowly toward the middle, though no oars touched it. A ripple spread against the current as if something was swimming upstream, something stronger than the river itself. Abram clutched his coat tighter, the politeness gone from his face. They are calling what should never answer. Mara turned on him, desperate. Then help me stop it. He looked at her shadow, then at the watch pulsing in her hand. You have the minutes. Only you can command them. But be warned, if you give them to the river, you will lose them forever. If you keep them, the shadow grows until it no longer shares your shape. The choice knifed her. 3 stolen minutes were burning inside her veins, thundering in her heart, a promise of power, of second chances. Her mother's breath still echoed in her ears. She could not bear to let it go. From the ferry came a hollow groan, with straining as though something far heavier than men had stepped aboard. The pallbearers raised their coffins high, like offerings. The fog thickened, swallowing the riverbank until even the chapel disappeared in gray. Her shadow's hand stretched toward her lantern, fingers black against the trembling glow. You cannot stop them, it murmured in her own voice. But with me, you can rule what they serve. Mara's throat closed. Fear and temptation braided together inside her like 2 snakes. Abram shouted suddenly, pointing. The courthouse clock, high above the valley, lurched forward another minute. Its hand pointed to 11:57. 3 minutes left until midnight. 3 minutes until the debt was due. And in the silence between ticks, something climbed onto the ferry. She heard its wet, dragging breath. From bank to bank the water seized into glass, ice climbing the current as if time itself had stopped flowing. The ferry groaned under a weight Mara could not see. The pallbearers fell to their knees, coffins lifted high as if presenting crowns to an unseen king. Mara's lantern spat sparks and nearly died. She shielded it with both hands, but her shadow leaned tall behind her now, its eyes wide, its mouth shaping words her lips had not formed. Let me. I was born for this. The courthouse clock struck again. 11:58. Abram backed away, hands raised as though surrendering to something that hadn't yet arrived. It comes to collect the hour, not the minutes. The pallbearers only prepare the way. His dead voice shook. If you mean to survive, you must choose. Banish the shadow before the final stroke or crown it before the first of the new day. Her breath caught. And if I do nothing, then it will take the town, he whispered. The ice cracked in the river, a jagged seam splitting toward the hill. Mara felt the vibration under her boots as if the frozen water carried footsteps. The shadow at her feet straightened, tugging against her spine, trying to rise separate from her at last. Its mouth brushed her ear, though it never left the ground. Give me the night. I will hold it still. I will bind the river, silence the coffins, freeze the pallbearers where they kneel. Her chest pounded with the stolen 3 minutes, every beat a drum summoning either salvation or ruin. She thought of her mother again, how 3 minutes could have been enough to stop a fall, swallow a pill, call for help. She thought of what it meant to let go. Across the valley, the clock groaned. 11:59. 1 minute left. The fog ripped apart as something vast began climbing the frozen riverbank. Mara could not see its face, only a crown of dripping weeds and a hand too large for any grave. The pallbearers wailed in joy. Her shadow hissed, eyes blazing. Choose me, Abram cried out. Choose quickly. And Mara knew whatever she decided in the next 60 seconds would bind not only her, but every tick of the town's heart forever. The thing that rose from the river wore darkness like armor. Its body was stitched from water and weed, from broken timbers and rusted nails, from every drowning the ferry had ever known. The pallbearers pressed their coffins to the ground in reverence, and the ice groaned beneath the weight of its first step onto land. Mara's lantern flared white, then guttered low. Her shadow reached again for the flame, stretching taller, freer, as if it could step out at any moment. Its voice curled inside her skull. With me, you can chain it. Without me, you will kneel like the rest. The courthouse clock began its final toll. Dong. Her breath caught. One more strike, and the hour would belong to the river thing. Abram dropped to one knee, his dead eyes blazing with resignation. "Keeper, the moment is yours. Bind the minutes to yourself or surrender them." Mara closed her eyes, clutching the watch so hard the cracked crystal cut her palm. She felt the 3 minutes burning inside her veins, searing like stolen lightning. She thought of her mother, of promises whispered into stone. She thought of her brother's name carried off by water. And then she thought of herself, how much of her still belonged to her, and how much was already swallowed by the thing with eyes at her feet. The second-to-last toll shivered through the valley. Dong. Her shadow's fingers laced with hers, cold and real. It whispered, "If you crown me, I will make the river kneel." The watch in her palm beat against her skin like a second heart. She understood then, the choice was not whether to keep the minutes or release them. The choice was what kind of keeper she would become. The final toll gathered on the clock's tongue. The river thing's hand reached up the hill. Abram bowed his head. Mara opened her eyes. Her shadow opened its eyes. And together they spoke. The courthouse bell struck midnight, and everything stopped. The fog froze mid-swirl. The pallbearers locked with coffins half raised. Even the river thing hung suspended with its dripping crown tilted toward the hill. Time itself had paused to hear Mara's answer. Her voice and her shadow's voice spoke as one. "The minutes are mine." The watch burst in her hand. Light streamed from the crack in its face, flooding her veins, her eyes, the breath in her lungs. She staggered, but the shadow caught her, holding her upright. For the first time it moved not behind her but beside her. A twin formed from smoke and night. His hand in hers was solid, cold, and alive. The frozen silence shivered. The river thing's head tilted, weeds dripping ice. Took one more step onto the hill, each footfall a quake. The pallbearers shrieked with delight, their hollow mouths stretched wide. But Mara no longer cowered. She lifted the lantern, its weak flame now fed by the burning glow inside her chest. The light stretched higher, cutting through fog and shadow alike. Her twin raised its hand too, and where its fingers touched the air, cracks of darkness spread like shattered glass. Abram stared, a mix of fear and reverence written across his corpse-pale face. "You've crowned it. You are keeper and shadow both. No clock will ever run without you." Mara's heart hammered with the rhythm of 3 stolen beats, over and over, never fading. She understood then. She hadn't claimed just 3 minutes. She had bound herself to every moment that slipped between ticks, every silence that clocks tried to hide. The river thing roared, shaking loose chunks of ice from its shoulders. Its voice was the voice of drowned men and lost women, of ferry ropes snapping and oars splintering. "The hour is mine," it thundered. Mara's shadow bared its teeth. "Not tonight." The two forces collided on the frost-crowned hill, time's thief against the river's hunger. And in the stillness that followed, the future of Darlow's ferry trembled like glass caught between hammer and hand. The collision was not of flesh or stone but of laws. The river thing struck with the weight of inevitability, the promise that all who sailed would sink, that all hours ended in drowning. Mara and her shadow struck back with the stolen rhythm of 3 minutes that refused to end, a heartbeat that defied silence. The air screamed, frost shattered into needles, slicing the fog into ribbons. Graves split, not with corpses rising, but with time itself yawning open, moments unspent spilling like sand from broken clocks. The pallbearers wailed, coffins bursting into dust as their devotion was torn in 2 directions. Mara's lantern flared into a sun, the flame fed by the shadow's dark hand. Together they pressed against the river thing's chest. Its body buckled, water boiling, weeds crisping into ash. It clawed at them with fingers big as oars, but each strike slowed, dragged, as though forced to crawl through syrup. The 3 minutes she carried bent the rules. Within their light, nothing could finish, nothing could close, nothing could drown. Abram Vance watched, lips moving soundlessly, as if counting seconds that would not pass. His dead eyes filled with tears he should not have been able to shed. At last, the river thing faltered. The weeds of its crown fell in heaps, its body sloughing into puddles that steamed on the frozen earth. Its final roar cracked into silence, and then it was gone, dragged backward into the river's black heart, leaving the ferry adrift on broken ice. The pallbearers dissolved into mist, coffins collapsing into their own shadows. The chapel rope stilled, The courthouse clock struck once more, clean and steady. 12:01. Mara fell to her knees, the watch shattered in her bleeding hand. Her shadow knelt with her, still separate, still alive, its glowing eyes softer now. It leaned close, whispering not hunger but devotion. We kept the night. She looked across the graves to her mother's stone. For the first time, her promise did not feel like a delay. It felt like a vow she might one day fulfill on her own terms. The fog thinned, the stars returned, and though every clock in Darlow's Ferry ticked as it always had, the town would never know how close it had come to being swallowed whole. Only Mara knew. Mara, and the shadow that would follow her until the last of her minutes was spent.